In November 1922, in a narrow ravine in the Valley of the Kings on the west bank of the Nile, a water boy clearing sand from an excavation stumbled on a stone step cut into the bedrock. It was the beginning of the most consequential archaeological discovery of the 20th century, possibly of any century. The tomb of the pharaoh Tutankhamun, designated KV-62, had lain sealed and largely undisturbed for more than 3,000 years. When Howard Carter and Lord Carnarvon stood before the breach in its inner wall on the evening of November 26, 1922, and Carter held a candle to the opening, the light reflected back from a density of gold objects that neither man had ever seen or imagined seeing. "Yes," Carter said, when Carnarvon asked whether he could see anything. "Wonderful things. The long road to the discovery." By the early 20th century, most Egyptologists had concluded that the Valley of the Kings was exhausted. Decades of systematic excavation had accounted for the tombs of most of the pharaohs of the New Kingdom, and the prevailing view among the profession was that whatever remained undiscovered was likely to be minor or entirely absent. Howard Carter did not share this view. A meticulous and intuitive excavator who had been working in Egypt since the 1890s and had developed an exceptionally detailed knowledge of the valley's topography, Carter was convinced that one significant tomb had yet to be found, the burial of Tutankhamun, the boy pharaoh of the 18th dynasty, who had ruled for approximately 10 years in the 14th century BCE and whose name had been almost entirely suppressed from the historical record by his successors. The funding for the search came from Lord Carnarvon, a wealthy English aristocrat who had developed an interest in Egyptology during a period of convalescence in Egypt and had been financing Carter's excavations since 1907. By the autumn of 1922, Carnarvon had effectively decided to end the project. The money spent over many years had produced results, but not the one Carter was looking for, and Carnarvon's patience and resources were both running thin. Carter persuaded him to fund one final season. The water boy found the step on the fourth day of that season. The opening. The staircase that emerged from the sand led to a sealed doorway bearing the cartouches of Tutankhamun and the intact seals of the royal necropolis. Intact seals meant, with a high degree of confidence, that the tomb had not been completely plundered. A rarity in the Valley of the Kings, where virtually every other royal burial had been systematically stripped by ancient thieves. Carter sent a telegram to Carnarvon in England, "At last have made wonderful discovery in Valley, a magnificent tomb with seals intact." Carnarvon and his daughter Lady Evelyn Herbert arrived in Luxor 2 weeks later. On November 26, Carter made a small breach in the plastered wall at the top of the staircase and held a candle to it. The hot air escaping from the sealed space briefly extinguished the flame. He relit it and looked through. What he saw in the antechamber, gilded couches, disassembled chariots, alabaster vases, wooden chests inlaid with ivory and ebony, 2 life-size black guardian statues flanking a sealed doorway, represented an accumulation of royal treasure without parallel in the modern archaeological record. The antechamber alone contained more than 700 objects. It took Carter and his team 10 years to fully excavate, document, conserve, and remove them. Who was Tutankhamun? New section. The irony of Tutankhamun's fame is that it rests almost entirely on his obscurity. He was not a great military commander, a prolific builder, or a religious innovator in the manner of his immediate predecessors. He came to the throne around 1332 BCE, probably at the age of 8 or 9, following the death of the pharaoh Akhenaten, most likely his father, whose radical attempt to replace the traditional Egyptian pantheon with the monotheistic worship of the sun disk Aten had thrown the country into religious and administrative upheaval. Tutankhamun's reign was defined largely by the reversal of Akhenaten's reforms, the restoration of the old gods, the reopening of the temples, and the return of the royal court to Thebes from Akhenaten's purpose-built capital at Amarna. He died around 1323 BCE, at approximately 18 or 19 years of age. The cause of his death has been the subject of intense investigation and considerable controversy. CT scanning of the mummy in 2005 identified a fracture of the left knee consistent with a severe injury shortly before death, DNA analysis in 2010 detected the presence of multiple malaria parasites and confirmed that Tutankhamun suffered from Kolar disease, a degenerative bone condition that would have made walking painful and physically demanding. The most current interpretation is that he died of complications, possibly a combination of the knee fracture, malaria, and the general physical fragility produced by the genetic consequences of close family intermarriage, which was standard practice in the 18th dynasty royal family. He was not murdered, though the murder theory was popular for decades. He was a young man in poor health who sustained a serious injury and did not recover from it. His successor, arranged the burial. The tomb that became the most famous in the world was, by pharaonic standards, a relatively modest one, smaller and less elaborately decorated than those of his predecessors and successors, which is precisely why it survived. The larger, more prominent tombs were the ones the ancient thieves targeted first and most thoroughly. Tutankhamun's tomb, tucked into the valley floor and subsequently buried under the debris of later construction, was overlooked. 3,000 years of obscurity preserved everything. The contents, what 3,300 years had preserved, expanded. The antechamber opened into a treasury and an annex, both crammed with objects. Then came the burial chamber itself, its walls painted with scenes from the Book of the Amduat, the ancient Egyptian guide to the underworld, in a style of unusual freshness that suggested the paint had barely dried before the tomb was sealed. The chamber was almost entirely occupied by the outermost of 4 nested gilded wooden shrines, each fitting inside the next like an elaborate set of boxes. Inside the innermost shrine stood the granite sarcophagus, inside that, 3 anthropoid coffins nested one within another. The innermost coffin, the one that directly enclosed the mummy, was made of solid gold and weighed 110.4 kilograms. It remains the heaviest single gold object from the ancient world. The mummy of Tutankhamun wore the gold mask that has since become the face of ancient Egypt to the entire modern world. The mask is 24 centimeters tall and weighs 11 kilograms. It depicts the pharaoh with the striped Memes headdress, the false beard of divine kingship, and inlaid eyes of obsidian and quartz that convey, even across 3 millennia, an expression of extraordinary stillness. The inlay work, lapis lazuli, carnelian, turquoise, obsidian, and colored glass, represents the highest level of 18th dynasty craftsmanship. Carter described opening the innermost coffin and seeing the face for the first time as one of the most profound experiences of his professional life. Beyond the burial equipment proper, the tomb contained objects that illuminate the texture of daily life at the Egyptian court. Hunting equipment, walking sticks adapted for a person with a physical disability, a trumpet, board games, a child's chair that Tutankhamun may have used as a boy, food offerings including wine, bread, and dried meat, linen garments still folded, and a lock of hair belonging to his grandmother Queen Tied, preserved in a miniature coffin as a personal memento. These objects make the archaeology intensely personal in a way that the grand official monuments of Egypt rarely do. This is not a king performing kingship for posterity. This is a collection of things that belong to a specific human being who used them and cared about them. The curse, myth, media, and mosquitoes expanded. Lord Carnarvon died in Cairo on April 5, 1923, less than 5 months after the tomb was opened. The cause was blood poisoning following an infected mosquito bite. He had accidentally cut the bite while shaving, and the resulting septicemia spread rapidly. He was 57 years old and had never been in robust health. The tabloid press of the day, working with speed and creativity that would not look out of place in the internet era, immediately connected his death to the opening of the tomb and to an inscription allegedly found on the inner wall: "Death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the peace of the king." No such inscription was ever found in the tomb, as Carter repeatedly and patiently pointed out. The story was invented, embellished, and distributed globally within days. The curse narrative was reinforced by subsequent deaths among people associated with the discovery, though statistical analysis of the lifespans of all those who were present at the opening consistently shows that they lived, on average, to a normal or above-average age. Carter himself, the person most intimately and repeatedly exposed to whatever the tomb contained, died in 1939 at the age of 64. The curse had not found him. What the curse narrative did find, and has continued to find for a century, is an audience, because it offers a satisfying narrative shape to an uncomfortable fact, that in disturbing the carefully arranged preparations of the dead, there might be a cost. There was no supernatural cost. But the human desire to believe there might be has never diminished. The legacy. Carter's decade of methodical work in the tomb of Tutankhamun established standards of archaeological documentation that remain foundational to the discipline. Every object was photographed in situ before being moved. Every item was catalogued with a unique reference number. Carter's original index cards, preserved in the Griffith Institute at Oxford, remain primary scholarly sources. The conservation techniques developed during the excavation. Some improvised under field conditions, others adapted from existing practice, directly influenced how subsequent generations of archaeologists approached the challenge of preserving fragile ancient materials in the transition from burial environment to the open air. The objects from the tomb are now housed primarily in the Grand Egyptian Museum in Giza, which opened its full collection to the public in recent years after decades of preparation. For the first time since Carter removed them from the tomb, all of the approximately 5,000 objects from KV-62 are displayed together, in a purpose-built facility designed specifically to present them in context. The gold mask remains the centerpiece, the face that looks back at anyone who looks at it with an equanimity that 3,000 years of darkness has not disturbed. Tutankhamun was a minor king who ruled briefly, was forgotten almost immediately, and was preserved by that forgetting. He became, through the accident of survival, the most recognizable individual from the ancient world. His face is known to more human beings than the faces of almost any other person who has ever lived.